an MHCC meeting, but I'm going to go ahead and kick us off and start with the meeting logistics and the, I'll go ahead and, do you want me to do the roll call first?
Please.
Or do you want me to wait? Okay. So let's see who I see on the line, and forgive me if I'm not quite as adept at this as David is. Okay. So on the line today, from the council, I see Bob Atlas, Debbie Kutchka-Craig, obviously Dr. Haft, Kevin Hayes, Dr. Reedman, and Dr. Berenson. Is there anyone that I've missed that's on the line from the council at this time? Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started and read the opening remarks. Good evening. We want to remind everyone the meeting's being recorded. In the event the meeting is hacked, please hang up immediately. And then I will send you an email through the MDPCP mailbox with a new meeting link that will allow you to log back in. The recording will be available to the public. So please contact Anana or myself if you're having any technical issues. You can chat it, you can text us, whatever works the best for you. So you can mute and unmute yourself using the small button that looks like a microphone. Please remain on mute when you're not speaking to reduce the background noise. Staff may mute you, but you're always able to unmute yourself. Please announce yourself when speaking. So you can use the chat function to send notes. It does send it to all attendees. The chat on this technology you're not able to send it privately. So everyone is free to speak throughout the meeting. What we ask is so that we can sequence the speakers. If you hold something up, you can also put in the chat that you'd like to speak, and we can do it that way. If David's not on the line, we'll be sequencing the speakers. So at this time, I will turn it back to Dr. Reedman to provide us some opening remarks.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Melanie. So I'd like to get through tonight. In particular, we're going to have another presentation by the H-Metrics on the performance-based adjustments. And in a second, I'll give Dr. Haft a chance to update the PMO side of this. And then what I'd like to really get through tonight, though, is the financial discussion we've had for the last two meetings. And that it really kind of boils down to, I think, three issues. One is the patient the money follows the patient versus the practice, which we've talked about. Some recommendations, general recommendations, I would say, about what the investment in primary care really is. And I think once we have the performance-based adjustment information plus the discussions we've had previously, we'll have enough information hopefully tonight to at least make some general recommendations, which would be our goal. So I'm going to turn it back to Dr. Haft, let him make some comments, and then we'll go with H-Metrics presentation.
Hey, thank you, Michael, and thank everybody for hanging in there for these many weeks, week after week. It appears that we maybe have before the deadline to submit the policy statements to CMMI to help them form their ISIP going forward in 21. We have about 4 weeks, 4 meetings left, maybe 5, but somewhere between 4 and 5 meetings, depending on everyone's appetite. So really very little time to get an awful lot done. Just as a reminder, several weeks ago, the instruction we got from our colleagues at CMMI was that they wanted to pivot to more of policy statements rather than great detail in language. And we started doing that last week. And I think we can, if we're diligent about it, get through the broad policy statements that will help inform this program going forward by the end of the year. In order to make sure that we're making forward progress and not moving backward over time, I wanted to restate what we've heard and what we'd like to be able to then, as early as tomorrow, begin to CMMI in terms of input on the policy direction. The first item is the primary care framework, primary care first framework. I think we've begun and we continue to adhere to that framework, saying that that the track 3 would be within the Maryland Primary Care Program. It would not be a separate program, but it would look substantially like the broad framework of primary care first. That is, having a population-based payment, having a fixed flat fee, and then having a performance adjustment. Those 3 big building blocks. So just reaffirming that. Reaffirming from what we heard last week in terms of the funding level, the question that was posed to the group, and what we heard, I think, consistently was, do we want this to be equal to the payments before the performance adjustment to be equal to fee for service? Do we want it to be equal to what the track 2 payments are, or the track 2 plus a little bit, given the fact that that there's going to be this large amount of money now, the larger amount of money would all be at risk going into this new program, and the indication was that it was something greater than track 2. We didn't put an absolute amount, how much greater than track 2 equivalent, but that it would be greater than track 2 in order to allow that flexibility in terms of risk. We also heard in terms of the population payment versus the flat fee, that there was a clear indication that we wanted to move away from fee for service, so moving more toward population-based payment, free us up from that, and moving at least to 50%. Again, the numbers and how we work out the numbers and the details as you know, how you balance that out between a flat fee and population, and how the risk tiers are adjusted, are all mutable themselves, but these are the policy pieces to move more toward population-based payments. We talked about the difference between the average, the characterizing practices by their average HCC score versus the money follows the person. As we've begun to understand what the reason for this new introduction of average HCC score, it was a mitigation against potential upcoding. We found that, and we found no evidence of upcoding in our look at the Maryland Primary Care Program, and we feel that there's safeguards against fraudulent upcoding already built into the participation agreements. And further, we found that the average HCC score per practice significantly disadvantaged practices. They cast us all practices into group 1 and a few into group 2, but none into group 3s or 4s, which are the groups that take care of more significantly ill patients, while we recognize that virtually all of our practices take care of significantly ill patients. So we've moved back. I think the intention was to move to using the tiers that are described in primary care first for alignment, but doing it based on money follows the person, rather than an average HCC score. We reaffirmed in terms of the flat fee that the flat fee should be an amount that allows for more in the population-based payments, and it neither incentivizes greatly more fee-for-service face-to-face visits, nor disincentivizes or devalues the ability to do that, knowing that we want to continue to provide that service. And the exact amount was somewhere, it was not a level 2 and it was not a level 4, it was somewhere between there. I think we're continuing to modeling depending on nuances, but that amount doesn't need to be settled now, only the fact that we wanted it by policy to either incentivize or disincentivize and allow more money to be in on the population-based side than on the direct fee-for-service side. I think we confirmed that we do believe CTOs are a valuable part of the Maryland Primary Care Program, and we would intend to continue those. And I think we talked about, and there's some language in the handout that you got about progression on tracks, that we would phase out track 1 over the next several years by 2023. And we had intended to do that anyway. That's not a nuance. We had already planned to have practices move from track 1 to track 2, but then we would further confirmed that by 2026 that we would be phasing out track 2 and practices would move, by that time in 2026 into the new unified track 3. We have still more details in terms of risk corridors and other things that we need to make happen over the next several weeks to assure that as we make that transition, that the program is still sufficiently attractive to the broad brushstroke of practices across the state, so that we don't wind up with a nice program that only has a few practices in it, because that would not be broad healthcare transformation. So there's still work to be done on what that looks like, and making it both attractive and flexible, and also having all the same trappings of track 3. So there's still work over the next several weeks to do, and we'll be talking about that. So let me just pause there. I think those were things that we had already talked about over the last several months. So I wanted to make sure that we take a pause there, make sure there's no great objections to any of those general policy issues, and if not, move on then to our work with performance adjustments tonight. So let me just take a pause and see if there's anyone that's shaking their fist and saying, that's not what we do. I've never heard that information before.
So, Dr. Half, while the council members are thinking about that, Alana, why don't you pull up the document where the top half reflects what Dr. Half had covered, in case folks just want to get a good sense right there. So I think Dr. Half largely covered items 1 through 6. I've joined a little late. My apologies. Welcome, everyone. But you might want to take a moment or two just to gaze at and to formulate any questions for Dr. Half that you might have. Any reactions, comments, or thoughts? Dr. Reedman, you feel that this is accurate? We're on target. Any concerns, questions?
No, I don't. I think that our conversation last week, where we kind of summarized things, that the true investment here should be an investment in primary care. And we talked about the fact that primary care has been underpaid or less appropriately paid, I'll say, over the years, and that more appropriate reimbursement for primary care was an important part of this program, and that in addition to that, primary care physicians need some extra funds to cover the extra work involved with this, the administrative burden, the staffing requirements, all of that, and then on top of that, some type of incentive program to help reduce the cost of care and all. And I think these are the conversations we've been having. I think that as long as we don't have to, I don't want to get bogged down now, Howard. I'm asking you the question, but my impression is we do not need to come up with a number for our flat fee or anything along those lines. We just need to come up with some policies that this is our goals and this is where we want to get to, and then we'd have some of next year to come up with a more detailed discussion of the fees, is my understanding.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I think we're forming policy in the detail about how the actuarial balancing of those around the policy is work that can be easily done in the future.
And I just
brought back to council.
Yeah, I just want to restate though, because I thought Dr. Pham put in the best comment that the investment here doesn't need to be on the back of primary care physicians, that the investment in primary care shouldn't be on the back of the primary care physicians. And I just want to I thought that was a really good summary of kind of my thoughts. So I just want us to keep that in mind as we go through these conversations, discussions. Yeah. So go ahead, David.
Oh, no, that's a good point. I didn't mean to cut you off. I think, no. Bob, if you're concluded, Bob Atlas has a question or comment.
Yeah, thanks. Listen, I apologize for bringing up something. I have to drop off in about 10 minutes to deal with another matter. I want to say, the outline that's here looks good. A couple things. One, we, as it connects to the model, the total cost of care model, having the downside risk, the track 3, is something that CMS is looking at as a satisfier for how they view Maryland performing in terms of what they call care transformation, because they're counting, how much downside risk there is on providers throughout all of the different programs that we have. So I want to kind of endorse that. By the same token, I think we can't help but acknowledge that, it looks like we're going to have a change in administrations shortly, and that while we owe this document to the feds now, we might expect that a few months into 2021 that there might be some different perspectives on whether this particular primary care first is the be all and end all. So I would just encourage, thinking about that strategically. I don't have like a specific set of guidance to offer there. Just bear that in mind. Thank you.
That's a good point. Anyone else? Dr. Pham, Dr. Berenson, Dr. Barr, reactions?
No, just I think Bob's last point about the potential for change is correct. In the past, the level that we're talking about, sort of somebody reporting to a new person within CMMI who's got oversight over this project, would take many months to filter down. But the Biden transition, well, it's obviously delayed given what's going on right now. But they are pretty active in healthcare, and so it's just rare. I guess my point is how soon any change in policy will filter down to the level where it affects this program. It could be within the first few months. It could be a year out before it down to this level. So I don't know how you plan other than to go forward with what we're doing.
Dr. Pham?
So I think all of those comments are very reasonable. With regards to Bob's last question about how do you plan for it, I think the only thing we can do is to develop our collective point of view in terms of what we think would be the ideal, so that we know, so that we're not negotiating with ourselves by the time that new CMS leadership is ready to engage. I think that would be helpful. I'm sure they will throw more parameters at us as they figure out their perspectives, but I think us having our own would be a great, strong place to start from.
Yeah, good point. Dr. Barr, any additional thoughts here?
No, nothing to add. Agree with the comments.
Very good. Debbie, any comments from your perspective? And perhaps Kevin will tee you up afterwards to see if you have any thoughts here before we move on.
No, I think the outline captures exactly the conversations we've had in the last couple meetings. Thank you.
Wonderful. Kevin?
Yes, I agree. This is a very good outline, very solid, well summarizes everything we've been discussing. Thank you.
Outstanding. So, Dr. Haft, and I may have missed it too, joining a few minutes late. Were you able to talk about next steps, how you'll plan to use this particular policy guidance activities here?
So I did very briefly, but let me just recap in that we will meet tomorrow in the first of more formal, I would like to say face-to-face, but video face-to-face meetings with our colleagues at CMMI about the policy issues related to the development of this document called the ISIP. And we'll cover as much of this material as we can pack into an hour. And then we have a commitment from them to meet as often as we need to as we move forward, just knowing that there's 4 to 5 weeks left to finish this work. And then I think the work, so this really is a very substantial foundation for building the framework now. I think where we move to next is to the performance adjustment side, where we certainly need to have a performance adjustment and really want to use the time, talent, and guidance of this group to look at what is in primary care first and make meaningful suggestions about how we might, on a policy basis, modify that to fit the unique environment that we have here in Maryland. So I think we've given little teasers before with some of the presentations from H-Metrics, but I think the work for tonight is to dive deeper into that particular issue. I put here a couple of questions that just to frame your thoughts. Sorry.
Asking Alana to scroll down. Sorry.
Oh, all right. Thank you. And but we can just for you to look at. But I think right now what I'd like to do is to turn it over to Trojan Spader and H-Metrics to do the presentation about the performance adjustment, and then have a robust discussion.
Okay.
That's okay with the chairs.
Yes. Dr. Riemann, are you okay?
Wonderful. Well, thank you. Thank you for having us back for another week. We're going to talk today about performance-based adjustments. So everything we've shared with you over the last few weeks has been just the buildup of the total primary care payments that are all before the performance-based adjustments hit. So the summary that Dr. Haft just provided in terms of where we want to peg our payment rates, or how we want to actually structure those payments, beneficiary versus practice-based, all was getting just to where the primary care payments would be before adjustment. So now we're going to spend some time today talking about the performance-based adjustment structure as it is currently done in primary care first. So on the first slide, we're going to focus on structure. We're going to focus on what are the elements of the PBA, what are the various components that go into it, how do they relate to each other, how does it determine what an overall adjustment will be for an individual practice. We do have some decision points at the end that I think we can introduce now, and David, I may rely on you if we want to cover these after this slide, or if we want to go through the full presentation, we can kind of maybe see where we are in terms of questions and decide at that point. After I provide an overall review of the structure, I have some impact analyses where we have just had to make several assumptions to say, what if practices had a certain level of AHU or a certain level of approval for the quality gateway to then determine what their PBA is, what would that do to the overall payments within the model? So there's a few simulations to go through at the end of this presentation. But to get us started, I just want to start all the way at the beginning with what the performance-based adjustments are and how they work. This is a particularly complicated, a little convoluted, I don't even know how else to describe it. It's a very complicated process with several steps involved. So I want to walk you through that and then see if we have any questions about the overall structure before we actually apply and operationalize it to the model. So to get started, to achieve a positive adjustment, a practice must meet two criteria. They must pass the quality gateway, and they have to have a high AHU performance relative to its peers. AHU is referring to the acute care hospital utilization HEDIS measure. So this is the same quality measure that is used to determine a portion of the PBIP payment in MDPCP right now. But we are relying for primary care first, they're relying solely on AHU and not the EDU kind of compadre that generally goes along with it. So right off the bat, to get a positive adjustment, a practice needs to excel and pass the quality gateway and have high AHU performance relative to its peers. From there are two components that are included in the PBA. The first is a regional adjustment, which is how does that individual practice fare relative to its peers within a region? And then the second part is a continuous improvement adjustment. So relative to its own performance, excuse me, relative to its own performance, how is that practice, what is that practice's performance compared to the prior year? So one is just a performance measure relative to everybody else, and then the second being improvement over time. Do we want to pause for questions, David?
Dr. Riemann, I propose that we continue onward unless you have any objections to, and then we come back to questions.
I agree. I think this is complicated because I actually already have a question too, but I'll hold it.
Thank you. Audrey, please proceed.
Okay. Okay, so we have so we have two adjustments. We have our regional adjustment and we have our continuous adjustment. Just to be clear, for purpose of our modeling, we are only focusing on the regional adjustment. We do not have the quality data available at this point to look at 2 years of data in order to do a continuous improvement. So what I'm going to show you is really going to focus on about 2/3 of the PBA. There is one additional third that that is not accounted for in our modeling. So from there, there are 3 primary steps to determine the PBA amount when you're only considering regional adjustment. If we were to add continuous adjustment, we would add a 4th component here. So starting from the top, the first step that every practice needs to get through is the quality gateway. A practice needs to pass the quality gateway, which is defined by primary care first as exceeding the 30th percentile for each individual measure that is used in the program. This is an annual measure, so this is something that is assessed annually, and since you need to have 1 full year of performance data, the quality gateway doesn't actually apply until 2nd quarter 2022. So in primary care first, that's expected to start in 2021. They would use the performance measures for 2021 for the full annual year, the full year. They would evaluate that, have results available for quarter 2, 2022, and then those adjustments would then go in place from there onward. So for the first year, there is no quality adjustment. Quality adjustment starts in year 2. Again, it's an annual measure. You pass or you fail. It affects all of your payments for the year. The next step, we turn entirely to AHU, so the acute care hospital utilization. It is an observed to expected measure that is risk adjusted that looks at the acute care hospitalization use for the attributed beneficiaries relative to their expected utilization. According to the HEDIS measure, those expected values are based on comorbidities and chronic condition. So the observed values are compared to the expected values to determine if the utilization is on par, kind of on par with what was expected. So the second step here is that the AHU for the individual practice is above the 50th percentile of a national benchmark. So we need the reminder here that we are talking about PCF being a national program. They have set the national benchmark for the first year to be 1.16. So utilization for your beneficiaries in an individual practice is 1.16, is 1.16, which is higher than the expected value. An expected value would be 1.0. So it's how do you fare relative to the national benchmark? This is actually assessed quarterly. So in order to ensure that practices receive immediate feedback on their performance measures, all of the subsequent steps are evaluated quarterly. I don't have a good sense of how they're going to be, if they're going to be adjusting the national benchmark quarterly. I don't have those details, but our modeling is assuming everything is just done retrospectively annually. But it is a quarterly evaluation if you're at the national, if you've exceeded the national benchmark. So from there, so if a practice is doing well, they've passed the gateway, they have exceeded their 30th percentile of all of their peers for the quality measures, they have exceeded the 50th percentile for the national benchmark, they now get evaluated against their regional practices for the 75th percentile to see how they're doing on AHU. So if a practice exceeds the 75th percentile of their regional practices, again measured quarterly, then they are then in the ranking to have a positive performance-based adjustment. If a practice at any given point drops out of this logic, so if they don't pass quality gateway, or they don't pass the 50th percentile national benchmark, or they aren't above the 75th percentile of regional practices, then they would be subjected to either a negative 10%, or a neutral performance-based adjustment. So there's many ways, there's kind of many exit ramps off of this process in order to get to have a negative or a neutral adjustment. For purposes of our analysis, we are defining the regional practices as all MDPCP practices regardless of track. So since MDPCP is a state-focused program, we don't have the luxury of looking across a region. So we are defining the regional practices as all MDPCP practices, track 1 through 3. Okay, so with that dense but complicated explanation, I think we can probably pause now to see if there's any questions on just the general construct of how the performance-based adjustments work.
And Dr. Reedman, I think you had a question.
Well, I think actually, let me hold that question for a few minutes. I think it's already been answered in some ways, but I'll hold that for a minute.
Okay. Others, Dr. Pham, and then Debbie.
Is there a clear rationale for why they're using a national benchmark for AHU, but a regional benchmark for everything else?
Clear is subjective. It is my understanding. As a national program, they want to be able to look nationally to see if you're passing that initial threshold, and it provides an opportunity for there to be kind of symmetry in the system, right? So you have, you're exceeding the 50th percentile nationally. So across the program, 50% of practices would exceed that, 50% of practices would not. So I don't know if it's necessarily a, I don't know, I think it's just kind of, it's just a threshold.
Then why not do that for all of the metrics?
That's a great question. I don't have insight into why they're doing that. So the 75th percentile, actually, Alana, if you don't mind going to the very last slide.
If I could just point out the policy implication that I'm concerned about.
Mm-hmm.
If we don't need to, there is not a good rationale for pitting Maryland practices against one another.
So with the national benchmark, all MDPCP practices or all track 3 practices could be still in a position to gain. They could be in a position to have
with the regional benchmarks, which is what accounts for 1/3 or 2/3, right?
That's correct. That's correct.
That's the issue. Sorry.
Mm-hmm.
I'd have to chime in on that also. That's exactly the question that I think that you answered it. But that's if we're pitting the Maryland practices in basically half lose and half win. If it's regional, my understanding that doesn't seem to make sense. Am I right in that assumption based on the 50%?
Yes, based on our results, it's actually more than half. So more than half will have a negative or a neutral adjustment because, like I said, there's 3 exit ramps here. So you have the quality gateway that's going to give you a 0 or a 10. You have the national benchmark that's going to push you over to the 75th percentile criteria. And again, you have a 0 or a 10 there as well. Okay. I think the goal is not, I think speaking for PCF beyond my knowledge, the goal here was not to have, it was kind of not a budget, it was not a zero-sum game. It wasn't 50% gain, 50% lose, let's meet in the middle. They're giving the opportunity for all practices within a region to gain, but there is significant risk for practices that they could lose.
Dr. Pham, were you going to ask a follow-up before Debbie? Okay, Debbie. Thank you, Dr. Pham.
Yeah, I was just going to ask if you could remind us the cadence of these adjustments. Is this a quarterly kind of thing? And then what is the lag then? I know with the ACO data, whenever there was a national benchmark, it was quite a while until you found out how you did. But these are quarterly, so.
They are quarterly measurements. I do not have information on when that would actually be paid out, but given that it's based on quarterly performance, first quarter performance would end in March. They would need to then collect, aggregate all that information. I would imagine there'd still be a 3, 4, possibly 5-month lag in the payout. But the intent is to have it quarterly so that practices do not need to wait, similar to how they do now for PBIP that's based annually. So the measurement is done quarterly with certainly a bit of a lag to get the payments out to practices. for the payment adjustments.
And don't hold me to this, but I thought I saw in the RFA that it was was in the following quarter or 6 months. One of those two I seem to struggle on, but it gives you a sense of timing. I can't.
Yeah, I guess after you get into a cadence, there would be the opportunity for continued money to flow in. It's just the starting point. I worry about some of the smaller practices and how much they're dependent on these kind of different fund flows. Thank you.
Yeah.
And just to be clear, I'm trying to find the language right now. It's not at my fingertips. I believe the adjustment, it's actually a payment adjustment. So it's not a retrospective lump sum that you would get. It would adjust your next quarter's payments, your next quarter total payments. So it is rolling. You will always have an adjustment for every quarter after the initial lag.
Yeah. Dr. Barr.
Yeah, thank you. I've mentioned this previously when AHU came up and the concerns that NCQA has raised to CMS and CMMI about use of this measure at the clinician level. The complexity behind this is beyond my pay grade, but we have some research scientists who really understand this very well and have raised some concerns. So I'll offer again, if this group wants to hear from any of those, I'm happy to try and arrange that. One of the issues, of course, is denominator size and quarterly adjustments and all those kinds of things. But just suffice to say that we at NCQA have concerns about AHU being used for this purpose. It's a plan level measure with large N, and even then it's a complex measure at the plan level. So just want to raise that because a lot is dependent upon that for the clinicians in Maryland.
Dr. Berenson, where you? Oh, Dr. Haft.
Yeah, no, I thank you. I'd like to thank Michael Barr for that comment, and I also wanted for us to think about using AHU, acute hospital utilization, as a centerpiece measure for which this does, assumes that primary care has a very significant role in the overall acute hospital utilization. I think that's a concept that could be challenged, and how much or how little influence they have acutely in utilization or for acute utilization may not be sufficient enough to weight it so heavily in this performance adjustment. Just as a concept to think about, in addition to Dr. Barr's question regarding sample size.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Haft. Dr. Berenson.
Yeah, I would just add that I believe there's some empirical data that documents that it's not a good measure of primary care performance, that primary care doesn't influence much of it. So it's not only conceptually a problem, it's empirically a problem, is my understanding. I mean, they've taken a good idea and gone berserk with it. This is overly complex, it's false precision. I think everything else that we've heard about this payment model, we are sort of in sync with CMMI. I think this will be one in which I think we should figure out how to push back pretty significantly. This is overly complex. It becomes non-transparent. Physicians won't respect it, and therefore they'll game it if they did understand it. And I just think it's a non-starter. I mean, I don't know who came up with this, but I mean, I can see some theoretical what they're trying to achieve, but the result is much too much complexity and lack of transparency in how any of this will be calculated.
So Dr. Reedman, I'm sorry.
So I was going to say, I have to echo that. I think that when I hear what I consider most of the experts in this field, I mean, people on this committee, a lot of them do this for a living. They understand it better than I ever will. And when I look at the complexities and I hear the experts talking about how overly complex it is, the physicians are not going to feel comfortable with it. They don't understand where the money's coming from, what's happening. When you don't understand it, how can you control something that you don't understand? So how can you make an impact or make actionable items for something to understand? So I think it is way too complex, and it's not going to, if you don't understand how to change it, you're not going to be able to make any indents to it. I think that's a really important point.
So I think as Audrey continues to present onward, you're just going to, the thoughts you all have are going to be underscored dramatically, because she's about to get into a bit of the weeds for us here. So why don't we,
This wasn't the weed chat? Are you kidding me?
That was my exact reaction to everything. We're not we
Audrey, I have one more question about the quarterly payment. So
Sure.
Payment with the PBIP, there is a potential clawback at the end of the year. So is there a clawback? So if you have 2 good quarters and 2 bad quarters, you're going to get an increase for the first 2, and then it's going to be taken away the next if you have a bad one, or is it all adjusted at the end of the year and there's a clawback at the end of the year?
Oh, that's a great question. I don't know.
Okay.
I didn't see. I'm not sure. I'll look into this. You know, I've read these 20 pages about 15 times, and I'm still a little confused on the way some of it works. To mimic the point that you just made, I'll look into that for you.
Okay.
And Chad is surfing the RFA, but I don't remember clawbacks being mentioned in there. So I sort of think it is an adjustment. But maybe, Chad, if you're still on and looking through it, you can scan it real quick. Oh, look at that. Melanie, do you want to?
Some negatively assessed. Okay.
Yeah, so this is from Chad. I'm gonna have to put on the glasses to see this one. Debits resulting from negatively assessed performance adjustments. CMS may adjust future quarterly payments to reconcile difference in prior payments caused by the PBA. So in plan year 2022, CMS may retrospectively apply a debit to the Q2 PVP, depending on the practice's performance on a set of measures in the previous performance year. In 2023 and beyond, CMS will apply a debit to quarterly PVPs if the practice does not meet the minimum thresholds of the quality gateway. So it does sound like it's adjusted quarterly to me. David, do you read that any differently? Yeah, that's Dr. Pham has her phone up.
Dr. Pham.
So just to underscore Dr. Riebman's point and Bob's point, it's actually worse than not being able to act on the model because of its complexity. This becomes Pavlovian. It's now completely random what the reinforcement signal is that you're going to get, whether it's positive or negative, when it's going to come relative to your action. So it's now Pavlovian, and people's normal response to Pavlovian stimuli is to become, homicidal. I mean, it's crazy making.
Well, I think that's going to be the consensus throughout. But Dr. Riebman, I would propose that we continue onward and see if that my suspicion is confirmed as we get through the remainder of Audrey's presentation.
I feel like I'm a little set up here. I'm set up for failure.
But I'm still interested in what you're going to say, because I'm just curious. But I think we're all on the same page, because it does look like it's going to get more complex. But
absolutely,
very complex.
Yeah, why don't we finish with it, and then we can finish up our conversation.
Okay, great.
Dr. Riebman, I think Melanie.
Yeah, so Chad just put in a clarification that the failure to pass the quality gateway. So I think this gets to Dr. Riebman's point. So it'll reverse your previous positive adjustment and can take it down all the way down to a -10 or 0.
Right.
So like, let's say you had a positive 10. It doesn't just take 10 away and take you to 0. It can take you all the way down. So I think that's what that clarifying comment is. So I think was that what you were asking, Dr. Riebman?
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Great. So if we can go back in the PowerPoint to slide 3, I'll walk you through what we've done. So we were really interested in modeling the PBA, figuring out what they did and modeling the PBA to understand really the guardrails. So like the impact of PBA is so practice specific, and the intent is that the practices will be able to get this initial feedback on a quarterly basis and change their behavior and change their measures and all of that. We don't have that. We don't have data that we're able to do that with. So what we've done is, what if we could develop 4 scenarios that are kind of what ifs of if we were to able to anticipate what practices performance would be, we'd be able to set guardrails and say the overall impact on the policy would be between X and Y. Overall impact between X and Y. So we have 4 policies that we've developed, 2 of which we have 2 permutations on. So the first one, number 1, is that everybody passes the quality gateway. So what if we were to assume that every single practice in track 3 was able to exceed the 30th percentile for the 3 quality measures that we have access to? Everybody were to pass, so nobody takes that exit ramp and nobody is subjected to a 0 or a 10% at that point. This would make the PBA 100% based on AHU performance only. While this is kind of an extreme example, it is also the way that the PBA would work for year 1. Because absent of having quality data for that first annual year, the quality gateway doesn't start until year 2 of PCF. So the first year is entirely AHU based. So our first model of everybody passing the quality gateway is akin to the first year of the program. So now I want to jump to number 4, which is the flip of that. What if everybody fails? What if every single practice has at least one measure where they are below the 30th percentile relative to their peers on their quality measures? So if you take number 1 and number 4 together, you're getting your guardrails of saying this is the maximum impact on total payments. So that leaves us with 2 alternatives in the middle. What if we were to take those practices that had the largest impact or received the largest gains under track 3 relative to track 2, and we had them pass the quality gateway? So you're taking the practices that have the largest impact for track 3, whether it be because of PBP or flat fee, we're looking at the total only. What if those winners are the ones who pass? And the inverse of that is, what if we took the losers? What if we took the practices that had the largest decrease in total payment for track 3 relative to track 2 payments, and we made them pass? We gave them the upper hand and said, you are going to pass the quality gateway. So those are kind of 2 sensitivity analyses that kind of fall into the middle range of what would happen if those practices were the ones who win or lose for PBA. And we define winners and losers 2 ways, one based on dollar impact and one based on percent impact. These 2 metrics or these 2 measures are very well correlated. Generally, the practices that have the largest dollar impact also have the largest percent impact, but there are some anomalies to that. So we wanted to look at it 2 different ways. Okay, so I will remind you of those 4 policies multiple more times. So when we looked at the data, we needed to get data to measure our performance-based adjustments. So for AHU data, we have the 2019 final data for the MDPCP program for the practices that participated in 2019. For those practices that did not participate in MDPCP for 2019, we used their quarter 1 and quarter 2 2020 data that's received by CMS. So we're able to fill in kind of everything we need. All practices will now have AHU data available. One subnote here, which we haven't talked about yet, that I want to just make sure everyone's aware of. The way performance-based adjustments are really supposed to work within primary care first is that at a practice level, if you are in group 1 or 2, you are held to AHU. If you are in group 3 or 4, you are not held to AHU as your PBA. You are held to a total per capita cost, a TPCC. We are not looking at TPCC. We are applying uniformly all practices. Since it's money follows the beneficiary, it's a lot, we can't really have, differing measures for differing beneficiaries. All beneficiaries are subjected to AHU data. So the next bullet point is how we have our quality gateway. Our quality gateway is based on 3 MDPCP quality measures. These actually align in sort to the primary care first measures. But we looked at CMS 165, which is controlling high blood pressure, the 122, which is the diabetes hemoglobin control measure, and we look at the combined CAP score to capture patient experience. So just for purposes of our analyses, we took those 3 measures, and those 3 measures are going to make up the quality gateway. So a practice needs to exceed the 30th percentile in each and every one of those measures in order to have, in order to pass the gateway and be and have a chance at a positive adjustment. Okay, so for the quality gateway, where did we get that data from? We used 2019 data as well. We are looking at all track 1 and all track 2 practices, just because we're going to need that. Well, we look at all track 1 and all track 2 practices, excuse me, to understand the relationship between the measures. So again, we're in a situation where we want to simulate what the impact would be, and we wanted to understand specifically how likely a practice is to get past, to exceed the 30th percentile in all of these measures, or is there really no correlation between the measures and your likelihood of passing one has nothing to do with passing another? So we have found that 65% of practices would have passed the quality gateway across all 3 measures. So that's one of our fundamental assumptions I want to make sure everybody's aware of, is that we assume 65% of practices exceed the gateway. 65% of practices have greater than a 30%, exceed the 30th percentile for all 3 measures. How we define that 65% population are numbers 2 and 3 above. But just to get a handle on that, about 2/3 of practices exceed the 30th percentile on all measures. Excuse me. The regional peer group I mentioned earlier is based on track 1 and track 2 practices. And the national AHU is 1.16. Those are just input assumptions to remind us of. Okay, so now one step further in the weeds. Let's look what we actually found. So on the next slide, I want to take this one panel at a time, and I'm going to try to go slow so we can keep everyone together here. The top panel is looking at models 1 and models 4, where everybody passes the quality gateway and everybody fails the quality gateway. So on the top line of the chart, we have our total primary care payments. These are the numbers that we have modeled. The first 2 columns are pre-PBA, with our results showing in the second 2 columns. We show you the impact of what the impact of payment would be relative to track 2, which is the way that we've presented our results all along. But we also want to provide the impact relative to track 3, so you can see what the incremental increase or decrease would be to total track 3 payments. So you'll see in the middle of that table, you have a negative 1.14. 1.14 represented our overall model program impact. So using a money follows the person model, where the population-based payment is based on the HCC score of the individual beneficiary, and based on a flat fee that is akin to 99212, which was, I believe, $62. Track 3 payments before a PBA were 1.4% lower than track 2 total payments. If we go over one cell to the right, you have a 4.3, positive 4.3. That represents that relative to track 2 payments, if everybody passes the quality gateway, the overall program would exceed track 2 payments by 4.3%. If everybody failed the quality gateway and everybody was subjected to a 0 or a negative 10, the overall program would have a negative impact, a reduction in payment of 3.7 relative to track 2. So what's important here is just the range. So I think the specificity of 4.3 and negative 3.7 is not the critical input here. You were starting with a model that had track 3 payments of about 1% lower than track 2 payments. If everyone wins or if everyone loses, you're looking at almost like an 8 percentage point spread, positive 4.3 to negative 3.7. The following row is just giving you a new base. It's using the track 3 model. It's using the track 3 payments as your base So it is an increase, if everyone passes, an increase of almost 6% of payment relative to pre-PBA payments, or a decrease of 2%, 2.5% relative to pre-PBA payments. Now, if you look to the text on the right, this is what I was referring to earlier about the prevalence of positive and negative values. And I think this, this really actually stands true in all of the models we looked at. About 1/4 of practices would receive a negative payment if everybody, actually, if everyone passes and everybody fails, it's kind of the same. 25% of practices are going to receive a negative payment of -10. If everybody passes, 37% of payments are going to have, 37% of practices are going to have a neutral payment. So we're having close to 60% of payments that are going to have either a negative or a neutral payment, even if everybody passes. In the all fail model, everyone fails. Everyone gets a negative. 25% would be -10, 75% would have a 0. So just to give you a sense of where the practices would fare in that, that's where our modeling shook out. Okay, so at the bottom, we're showing our 2 intermediate models, which is what if the winners, those 65% of practices that had the largest increases in total primary care payments under track 3, what if they were the ones to pass the quality gateway? And what if the losers, those with the largest decreases in payments under track 3, were the ones to pass the quality gateway? I think you can just look at these numbers for directionality. I don't know if we need to dwell too much on them. They're within the range of models 1 and 4. So we're tightening our guardrail a little bit. And you'll see relative to track 2, let's see, that line, that's the -1.4 line that has 0.5% increase if the winners pass and 1.6% increase if the losers pass. And that's based on dollars, or if we do it based on percent impact, it's not significantly different. It's a 1.7% increase to 2.3% increase. So again, the numbers can be mind-boggling and can get us caught up for the rest of the night. But I think the sentiment here is that we're setting guardrails where there's probably an 8 percentage point spread in what the PBA could do to the overall payment, the overall program impact for payments. And then from there, for models 2 and 3, 25% of practices would get a negative and 50% of practices would receive a neutral payment. So after this slide, I want to do some provider impacts, but I want to make sure, well, actually, let's jump through practice impacts because that might go pretty quick, and then we can open it up for questions and we can go into everything we need to. So this is looking at the practice impacts. For this first slide is looking for everybody, models 1 and models 4, everybody passes, everybody fails, what's the impact? So on the bar chart, the blue bar is before PBA. So this is the model where on average we have a 1.4% increase in payment. The orange bar is if everybody passes, and you can see that there's actually not a lot of movement on the left side. There's not a lot of movement in everybody that's less than the 50th percentile or having negative impact. But there are significant swings for the people, for the second half, the other half. Those who have positive impacts under track 3 are going to have even higher positive impacts with their PBA. And then the gray is showing you what if everybody fails. Again, on the left side, looking at everybody less than 50th percentile of impacts is having the impacts, I guess, kind of mitigated a little bit. But there's definitely not as much gain on the positive side of the spectrum. So what we actually learned from this is that there's correlations. It's the practices that are gaining. The practices that are gaining under track 3 also happen to be the ones that have the more favorable AHUs that are allowing them that once they get past the quality gateway, they're the ones getting the 34% increase. or those other very extreme PBA increases. So this is not a random distribution. There is definitely a correlation between the AHU performance and the overall performance within the within track 3. On the last slide, on slide 6, this is showing the distribution for the winners and losers passing, and this is based on percent impact. Dollar impact has almost no change. I didn't want to clutter the presentation some more. And you'll see that, again, on the left side of the chart, where you have the practices that are below the 50th percentile and have negative impacts, the PBA doesn't have as significant impacts on total payments, but it does have that upward swing, that upward, that positive impact for the practices that are in the higher percentile bands. Okay, I promised you weeds. We're there. I think, David, at this point, we can open it up for
So do you want to back up Alana to the table? The little, I think it's 2 slides. I think that's the forward one again.
Slide 4, I believe.
There we go.
Yeah.
So I guess this is probably a good place as any to start. Questions for Audrey from the council? And while you're thinking for a moment, it is very complex, and I wonder if that's also your minds are spinning a little bit trying to understand it. While the group is reflecting on what's in the table, Audrey, could you just highlight again in 20 seconds what the group is looking at in each of the panels?
Sure. So the first panel is we're looking at the most extreme examples where all practices pass the quality gateway or all practices fail, which means the performance-based adjustment is based solely on AHU performance if everyone passes, or if everybody fails, everyone is subjected to a 0 or a -10 based on their AHU. So that's providing you with an overall potential maximum impact that the PBA could have on track 3 overall spending. The table on the bottom is just providing a little more specificity to say, what happens if 65% of if the 65% of practices that pass the gateway are those that were already receiving increases in payments under track 3, or if those 65% of practices that pass the gateway are the ones that were already losing. The ones that are already losing, if they pass the gateway, they have that opportunity to get that payment boost. In reality, it's going to be somewhere in between. So we're recognizing that we're providing we start with the broadest extremes with 1 and 4, and then with models 2 and 3, we're just narrowing it, but still providing some guardrails of what the PBA impact would be on the overall track 3 payments.
Okay, thank you, Audrey. Questions or comments? Dr. Pham, your thoughts?
So I have a comment and then a question, maybe that Howard can help us with. My comment is, because it is complex, but I think that our original conversation, thanks, Audrey. This is really, I find it very interesting to see all this data. But I guess my question to Howard is that I think we're all in agreement that this program or this PBA is just too complex for the practices. So what are our alternatives that the committee can recommend? What do we have as options, or what can we recommend as options? And is CMMI going to take any options we have and seriously consider them? I'd ask you that.
Michael, it's a great question, and I think among the options are, first, I think framing this out and understanding the direction that we're getting from our federal partners, and regarding performance adjustments, they have opined that performance adjustments are since this has to do with money that comes from the trust fund, that the final decisions on performance adjustments rests with CMMI. I think that's a contestable issue, and in fact, we have been quite able within the primary care program and with the total cost of care contract to develop a relationship so that we can align performance adjustments and measures with the state integrated health improvement strategy and make it so that it fits in, things fit into our specific Maryland model. But I think that by principle, they will hold that the final decisions about performance adjustments would be with the federal government. I think that we should understand that going into this, that this will be a negotiation. But I would say that negotiating towards simplicity, which and removing administrative burden has been one of the hallmarks of this current federal administration. I believe will continue to be a hallmark. And one of the things that we can advocate for is in terms of policy for simplicity. This certainly does, I think by everyone's estimation, this is not a simple model for performance adjustments. It's an uber complex model. And I think we could also, argue effectively for saying that whatever performance adjustments we have should clearly be should be related to what the state's goals are within the total cost of care contract, which includes the state integrated health improvement strategy. I think by policy we could argue that. I think by policy we could argue also that performance adjustments should appropriately be related to things that are mutable by the work of primary care practices. And I think so to me, it's a lot like building a model is a lot like writing music, is that you have to start out with a melody that will be pleasing to the ear. And to do that, you have to write the right notes together. Just putting random notes in, or putting all the notes that you have in your musical composition together at the same time and saying they're all good notes, let's just throw it together and it'll be beautiful, will never happen. So I think this is the same thing. We need to pick the right notes and decide whether, how do we want to hear that? Do we want to hear that in a beneficial way? Or do we want to hear it in a punitive way in order to get it, tempered in the way that will make sense going forward? So I think we have lots of options here. I think the first thing that I think we have to say is, if we reject this, what do we want to move toward? We do have a current model that we're using in the primary care program, which takes a bundle of selected, and it's mutually selected measures between the state and the federal government, weights them with some weighting. It's right now maybe it's not the perfect weighting, but there is some weighting, and then allows the individual weighting of those measures to go to adjust the what is now the PBIP, but to do basically the performance adjustment equivalent. If we move to a simpler model that had weighted measures and then decide whether we want to do that annually or quarterly, I think we could then kind of establish at least the melody. We'd have to still build more onto what's the musical composition of the chords and other things that go into that. But I think that's right now, if we're going to say this is too complicated, we have to start with what is less complicated and move from there. I think that's work that we could do over the next few weeks if the advisory council has interest in doing that. We're extraordinarily fortunate, again, as Michael, as you pointed out, and David pointed out, is we have some folks who are extraordinarily expert in doing exactly that kind of work who sit with us week after week. So I think we could push on their expertise to help us design something that would be beneficial to the total cost of care contract, but also be something that would be understandable, achievable within this new model.
I think Dr. Pham has a comment, Dr. Haft, building on what you said.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. I completely agree with Dr. Haft. I would also point out that sometimes it helps to clear the mind to think about what the end goal is. So if the end goal is to improve some meaningful outcome, clinical outcome, then there's certain kind of foundational science you fall back on. It's not meaningful behavior change unless it accounts for at least 10, 15, 20% of what someone is expected to earn. And that shows not at all in the modeling, our best effort at modeling at the moment. And I think it also goes to how many metrics you're going to include, because each metric will have only a fraction of that overall impact. And so, if we're after actual behavior change here, can we start with a discussion, not today, but when we talk about, our go forward, can we start with a discussion of, is it more important to us to get clinicians to improve meaningfully on a small number of dimensions, or to get them to do busy work on a broad number of dimensions? And if it's a small number, then we pick and choose and just accept that we're not going to change every dimension of clinical care through this model. And perhaps they pick different metrics each year, and shift their focus as they improve. But there are multiple reasons for the parsimony. I don't think it's just, the understandability of it. It's also, if we're after behavior change, people can only focus in so many places and actually care about it.
I think that's a really good point. The other side of that is, if you're going to focus on behavioral change, you have to give people behaviors that they can change. And so measures that I don't have an impact on or control over as a primary care provider, it's very frustrating when you're being measured on items that you don't have control over. I think that's a really critical point for us. Whatever we do, and it's been brought up already tonight a couple of times, it's got to be something that we truly can have an impact on, and that we can control, and that we can change that behavior for our patients and ourselves. So I think it's a critical point.
So then I guess a question back to Dr. Haft and the council is that, are we to a point where we'd say that modeling on the performance-based adjustment isn't as helpful at this stage, given the position that council is expressing, or is it thinking more about what the policy statement ought to be back to CMMI based upon the feedback you're hearing here tonight, Dr. Haft?
So it certainly sounds like we've heard a few people say that this performance-based adjustment is a non-starter. I think we can say something to get a reaction from CMMI fairly quickly, in saying that we believe the performance adjustment is necessary. We'd like to spend a little time and be thoughtful about how best to do that in alignment with this total cost of care contract and with the state integrated health improvement strategy in a meaningful way, and open the door to that discussion. I think that's a great policy statement, and there, we could put together, I would hope within the next few weeks, a plain vanilla version of what that would look like, without a great deal of detail, knowing that I think we'll have time after assuming that that's acceptable, time after the end of this year to work out details. We do right now. We gather the subsequent years performance measures and do the weighting. As a not quite last minute, but as a very late development before the subsequent year. So that's not something that the actual measure themselves don't need to be cast right now. It's the design and the policy that underpins the design that needs to be cast at this point.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Haft. I think Dr. Okiki had a comment. And Dr. Kiki, I think you're on mute, or we're not able to hear you at this stage. Okay, we can, if you want to see if you can resolve the challenges. I think we have a team behind the scenes that can help too. So perhaps an AD can reach out to you as well. Other comments from the council here? Perhaps Dr. Barrett?
I'm sorry. I was just going to say she can always add it to this chat and I can say.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we'll, Dr. Kiki, then we'll come to Dr. Berenson.
Okay, so yeah, I was just going to follow up with Dr. Haft and say week after week we've met to kind of crack this code for track 3, which is necessary, is our charge. But I was just wondering, is there any room for the council to also think about the performance-based improvement in payment and the influence, now knowing we got a pass in, because of COVID, but getting ready for the next year? What advice does the council have for practices as we go into 2021, especially around performance? And as Dr. Pham had mentioned, on focusing on the vital few that, we don't have that, that many matrix anyway, but what is the advice we want to give to those who are already in the program for 2021 in the here and now, while we also tackle this track 3 PBAs and flat fees and all? I just wanted to throw that out there.
So perhaps Dr. Haft wants to weigh in, but is that more of a conversation that we we kick the can down the road, or a sidebar conversation, Dr. Haft? And we may have...
Yes. I think for right now, I think it is an extraordinarily good and important question, but I don't think that we can answer that at the moment. But I think it is something that is top of mind for us, and in an ongoing discussion on the operational level. And as you know, that CMS has recently released some language about hardship for quality reporting overall because of COVID. So, and we're just beginning to understand how that may or may not impact the quality reporting and the targets with this program. Certainly this, no one doubts this has been an extraordinary year, not, an outlier with exogenous factors galore, and likely next year will be too. So I think, there needs to be, conversations about how that impacts anything that we do. But I don't think that that's the part of the conversation we're having now.
Okay, but good point. Thank you, Dr. Kiki. Dr. Berenson and then Dr. Pham.
Yeah, just to pick up a couple of threads of the conversation, which I mostly agree with. Well, I agree with all of it. If I were still running, being the managing partner in a primary care practice, and I saw these preliminary results of the financial impact, I would tell my partners to just ignore it. This is not enough to try to figure out what to do. So that goes to Dr. Pham's point about, to have impact, you have to have more money at stake. And so that, but with a lousy system, you don't want to put more money at stake. I found a wonderful quote from Catskill comedians: "The food's terrible and the portions are too small." You do not want to, if to do what Dr. Pham is suggesting, which I think is right, you really need to have a limited number of important performance measures. And the only thing I would add to that is that you probably need to deal and try to find a balance between how much of it is based on performance and how much of it is based on improvement. I mean, performance against some norm and improvement within the practice. I think probably some balance of the two would be the way to do it. I think we could do a better job making it simpler, identifying some high impact measures, and even suggesting that maybe after a trial period, it becomes a much more significant part of the, in other words, more money's at stake.
Yeah, that's a good point. It sort of goes to underscore what Bob Atlas had said about having risk in the program. I think you're saying you all want to have a program that you understand what's at risk, and you're able to have input in the process as it unfolds, as opposed to lack of transparency, which some have already mentioned tonight. Dr. Barr, were you going to make a couple of comments?
No, I was just liking the Catskill comment by Bob.
Oh, okay. Are there other comments here on as it relates to the performance-based adjustment? Dr. Haft and Dr. Reedman, we have about 10 minutes left on the clock. Rather than start something new, could we invite Dr. Haft to summarize the takeaway? And he mentioned that there's a CMMI meeting tomorrow, and then we talk about next steps.
Yeah, so thank you very much. I think, the summary is, where we've been so far with this evening is the policy discussion we had at the beginning, and I think moving toward suggesting a revision of the performance adjustment modeling, and we'll present that to at least as much as we can in an hour to CMMI tomorrow, and then revert back to the group. I think we're not together next week because of Thanksgiving. I encourage people to enjoy Thanksgiving, but not travel. We are in the, I think you all know this, but among the other things that we're involved in the state is this pandemic, and we're peaking in the pandemic now. And I can't really emphasize enough that, we've made our personal decisions for our family to not travel and not to attend college graduations and other kinds of things, just because the reality is this is a very dangerous time. So we won't be gathering together to meet next week, but I hope that that's not meeting that people will choose to. You're so valuable to us that you're not choosing to risk anything to you or your families. We'll gather together the following week. I think we'll perhaps do some offline work with some of the members on input on performance adjustment, and have something to discuss at the following meeting. Those are the only remarks. I just have to thank everybody. This has been what a wonderful group and thoughtful group to work with over the last several months. I think we're making great progress, and I think making some designs that can be really sustainable. So thank you all.
Thank you, Dr. Haft. Dr. Reedman.
No, I echo Howard's comments. I also wanted to take the opportunity to thank Audrey and her team. I think they've done over the last couple of meetings, done a really nice job of taking some complex issues and doing some really understandable and very helpful modeling. So I really appreciate their input. And again, I echo Howard's comments about staying safe through the holidays, keeping your family safe. And in particular, as a physician, if you do fry a turkey, be very careful. So I'll leave with that. So
thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
Let's see, before Melanie does her operation update, Ben, do you have any comments that you would like to make? We know you weren't able to join right away. Oh, and I think you're muted still.
Heard the last 10 minutes, that's about it. So I'm not sure if I would be on point or not, so I'm passing. Have a safe holiday, however you choose to celebrate it, but cautiously, I hope.
Okay, thank you, Ben. Melanie, do you want to talk about the operations update? Next step.
So we will be posting a high-level meeting summary as well as the video from this meeting. As everyone knows, the meeting materials are posted online as well as the information prior to the next meeting. So if anybody has questions, feel free to reach out to our team. And if anybody needs to troubleshoot technical issues between the meetings, if they want to do that, please reach out to us and we're happy to help out. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, Dr. Reedman, anything else? Are we good?
Good.
Everyone have a wonderful holiday, and thanks for all your hard work. And we'll talk to you on December 1st, if not sooner.
You.
Be well.
Good night.
See ya.